I'm not getting ready to go anywhere where I feel my voice is going to be limited, or constrained by someone else's opinion on what it should be, or have other factors come into play about who the bosses are and how will they feel if certain things are written. And I'll speak on that a lot more later, but at a later date. But we covered up a lot of things in that media group that shouldn't have been covered up. And was I complicit in it? You could say that. In part because if I were to say something, I would have been in breach of my contract. And I don't have a contract anymore. So.
Welcome to Raw Facts, and I hope you guys enjoy the upcoming episode with longtime NFL reporter Jim Trotter. Just a quick note before taking you guys into the show. Jim is no longer a free agent. He recently joined The Athletic. Hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Raw Facts podcast. I'm your host and producer, Ben Arthur, joined by the great Jim Trotter. I think, no, I have to pay my respects. I mean, this is a guy has a lot of respect in NFL circles, does his job the right way. Currently a free agent after the NFL media group's decision to not renew his contract. We'll get into all that, but this is a guy who's covered the league for years, has a lot of respect from his colleagues and players as well. Jim, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Appreciate you.
No, I appreciate you having me, man. We got to work on that intro and just that whole great thing, man. I'm like everybody else. I'm just a guy trying to do his job and hopefully do it well. So, but I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, no problem. And Jim, I kind of wanted to start at the beginning with you, your childhood, and kind of get a feel for what shaped you in terms of how you approach journalism. So I ask you, what was your childhood like, and how did that maybe influence the way you do your job?
Wow, man, that's a deep question that can really take up the entire podcast. As you get older, you start to reflect on all these things that have had an impact on you and has helped mold you into who you are. And so, for me, it was growing up in, a single parent home, not much money, during the early years, always rent hopping every year and always wanting more, wanting some stability, wanting more. And even as I got older, meaning high school, things like that, I always knew that that I wanted more for myself than what I'd had. And that's no disrespect to my mom or anything like that. It was just more of, I know there's more out there. And, neither of my parents graduated high school. My mom had to get her GED later in life for her job. And so no one in my family prior to me had ever gone to college. So there were a lot of things there that were at play where you want to be better and you want to help lay the foundation for those, for family that'll come behind you and whatnot. And so that's where the drive comes from, was just always that thing to have more, to do better. And I can vividly remember conversations I would have with myself about things that I wanted in life. And fortunately, the career path that I took has allowed me to have those things.
So speaking of kind of wanting more for yourself, for your life, what in that kind of maybe drove you to journalism in particular?
It wasn't so much those things that led me to journalism. What led me to journalism was, when I was in high school and I was playing various sports, and I always had an interest in writing about it. Because anyone, or I shouldn't say anyone, but most people who are in this profession grew up loving sports and wanting to be a part of it. And so one thing with me, I always try and be really honest with myself, whether it comes to my work or anything else. And so even at a young age, I knew I was never going to be good enough to play professionally. Could have played some small college football, but was never going to play professionally. And so what I would ask myself at that time is, how can I stay close to the game without actually playing it? And I couldn't write for our school paper in high school because obviously I'm competing on these teams, and so I can't write about teammates or what's going on. So there was
Hmm.
never really that opportunity in high school. But once I got to college, I knew right away what I wanted to do, and so I was always focused on working towards that goal of becoming a sports writer. And the interesting thing about that journey was, when I got to Howard, I was a broadcast journalism major. And by my senior year, I knew that broadcast journalism wasn't really for me. I wanted to be judged on my work, the quality of my work, and those sorts of things, and not on how I looked or how I sounded or those sorts of things. And I'm one of those guys who really likes stability. And so I decided at a late point in my college career to go print. I didn't have a lot of print experience. And so I started working from that element, writing for the Hilltop, our school newspaper, and whatnot. And coming out of college, I had two job offers. One was a full-time position at the Muskegon Chronicle in Muskegon, Michigan. It was about a 50,000 circulation paper.
Mm.
And the other one was a 6-month internship with the Cleveland Plain Dealers, which they were saying could turn into a full-time position. Well, again, me and my nature being more conservative and being honest with myself, I knew I wasn't ready for a paper the size of the Cleveland Plain Dealer. And I wanted to go someplace where I could get more training and sort of work my way up, and get all of the foundational elements that I would need. And so I went to Muskegon and was there for 10 months, and it was the best thing that could have happened to me because you got to do a little bit of everything. And that sort of laid the foundation for what would come next.
And Jim, so many people know you as the journalist who brings kind of those issues and topics of diversity or
Yeah.
activism or racial justice, whatever, in terms of the NFL and kind of how those issues are impacting the NFL and kind of what's being done about that. Um, I guess for you, why has that been so important to bring those topics to the forefront with your platform?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something that um, has always been there. But as you know, when you're young in this business, and particularly when you are a black man in this business, and you're in newsrooms where you don't see many of you, or you are in sports departments where you don't see any of you. When I got to the San Diego Union Tribune, what I was told, well, initially it was San Diego Union, merged with the Tribune, became the San Diego Union Tribune. And what I was told by people is that they had never had a black sports writer before in the history of the paper. And
Wow.
so, in different jobs that we're in, where we are often the only one or one of a few in a sports department. And so when you're young, you're still trying to find your way. And so while you may have certain things that you feel and things that you want to act on, you can't because I shouldn't say you can't, but you don't. I didn't because I was still trying to learn. I still felt like I had a lot to learn in the business. I hadn't established myself, and the last thing you want to do as a young person is create waves, and then not having that foundation in terms of having established yourself, have nowhere to go. And so I didn't act on these things when I was younger, even though I felt it. But one thing I tried to do always with my writing was to be fair, particularly with, black athletes in terms of understanding their perspective, as I wrote stories, and how my perspective and life experiences might be similar to theirs, and therefore I could bring a certain element to those stories that of fairness. It doesn't mean that I bent over and looked the other way if they did something wrong or whatever. It just means that there were elements of storytelling that I think related more to their experience. And so during the early years, I'm just trying to establish myself, trying to learn all I can, trying to find my way in the business and whatnot. And so by the time I got to Sports Illustrated, um, one thing, there was an editor there named Mike Blevins who told me, he would talk to me a lot about your voice, your voice. find your voice, trust your voice. Nobody else has your voice. And it took me a minute, but that's what I really worked on, trying to find my voice and speak to who I am and those sorts of things. And so by the time I got to ESPN, I was feeling more comfortable with that, and I was starting to feel that I had established myself to the point where now I could step out more, and in a professional way. I mean, you never want to do it in a way that it draws attention to you and makes you the story for a negative reason. And so really the flashpoint for me was 2016 after after Steve Weish had written that Colin was demonstrating and was not going to stand for the anthem. And that next game after Steve's story came out, the 49ers were playing in San Diego, where I live. And Colin was supposed to play for the first time. It was the final preseason game. He hadn't played all preseason because of injury. And so ESPN said, we want you to cover that for us. And so prior to the game, which happened to be on Military Appreciation Night here in San Diego, and the military is big here in San Diego, I'm doing a Sports Center hit. And the anchor back in Bristol, Connecticut is framing his question in such a way that it is about Colin being disrespectful to the military and disrespectful to the flag and those sorts of things.
Mm.
And as the question is being framed in my own head at that time, I'm already thinking how I'm going to answer it. And I'm saying to myself, you have two choices here. You can either allow him to frame it this way, or in a very professional way, you can reframe it yourself about what this is really about. And at that moment, I took the time to say, I'm going to reframe what this is all about. And I've not looked back from then. And the one thing that it said to me, or the way that it spoke to me, is from this point forward, I am going to, as best I can, give a voice to those whose voices are not being heard. And I don't say the voiceless anymore, because someone brought that up to me and made a great point and said, it's not that these people are voiceless, it's that you all aren't listening.
Yeah.
And so I try and make a point of saying, give a voice to those whose voices aren't being heard. And that's been my focus from that day forward. It really pushed me in a way to say, you know what, this is what I feel my purpose is in whatever years I have left in this business, is as best I can to give a voice to those whose voices aren't being heard.
You would mention, Jim, your time at the San Diego Union Tribune, and how as black people in this business, like, we don't see a lot of us, right? Like
Right.
in the locker room, covering the guys who are predominantly black, in the press conferences, whatever. There just aren't that many of us, and I see it. I've been covering the NFL for I think I'm going into my sixth season, but you've obviously been covering the league much longer than I have, and so I'm curious how much
Three
progress.
decades. 3 decades, I think.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, 3 decades, and I'm curious from your vantage point, how much progress you've seen in terms of the number of black faces that are covering the league now, compared to when you first got in the business 3 decades ago, and if you've actually seen tangible improvement.
Absolutely. I think I'd be disingenuous if I said there wasn't. When I look at guys like you, young guys like you know, um, Tayshaun Reed, Michael up in Seattle, and just look around the league. I see so many young black faces now, and it really inspires me, because I didn't have that. When I came in, one of the people most responsible for me being in this field was Ralph Wiley, the late Ralph Wiley, who I loved everything about him, from the first time I started reading him and saw him on television. Because Ralph, one of the things about him that really spoke to me is Ralph was his authentic self, and he was going to be unapologetically black, and he was going to speak to issues from our vantage point, and he didn't care who he was on set with, or he didn't care who was reading the story. He had his voice, and he was going to use it, and that always spoke to me. And again, you can't, you have to work to get there. Ralph obviously was respected, and had earned his stripes, so to speak, and so he could take that position. But back when I started, you have to remember there was no internet. And so
Yeah.
I couldn't see others who looked like me. And the funny thing is, truthfully, there were certain guys I was reading that I didn't even know were black. And I talk to
Mm.
them now and tell them that story. One of them was Ron Thomas, who's now running the
Okay.
sports journalism program down at Morehouse. And I tell Ron, as a Bay Area kid, I would read the Sporting Green in the San Francisco Chronicle and didn't know that the Ron Thomas I was reading was a black man. But in today's world with the internet and podcasts and YouTube and all of these different audio visual platforms, I see a lot more of us. I see a lot of young faces too, and so to me that's empowering. So you guys don't know it. Like, you come on here trying to give me my props, but I draw inspiration from all of you guys. I really do, because man, you guys are all. This is a talented young group coming up. The guys that I look at of your generation, and it's like I know this profession is going to be in good hands as we go forward because you guys bring it, man. So I love that. So props to you and the other young fellas, whether you guys realize it or not. I'm watching you guys and I'm drawing inspiration from you guys.
We appreciate the props, and of course guys like you set the standard, so we just try to live up to that. And Jim, obviously, a lot of folks who cover the NFL, or those who are familiar with the NFL and all that goes on with it, know kind of your situation with the NFL media group. You had announced on Twitter that the NFL media group had decided not to renew your contract, which I believe expired at the end of March or start of April. And of course, that's off the heels of the last 2 years where you've pressed NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell about the absence of black faces in senior leadership, and on the news desk for the NFL media group. And obviously want to be respectful of what you can and can't say, but what can you tell us about where you're at with that, and how you look on that situation as you kind of try to look forward?
Yeah. First of all, I know people have seen the Roger Goodell press conference the last 2 years, but this is an issue I've been bringing up internally for more than a year. And in fact, when I first got to the network in 2018, I brought it up shortly after that we had no blacks in senior management. And people say, well, why is that important? Well, number one, as I was brought up, a newsroom, as best it can, should be reflective of the community it covers. And so when you're talking about we cover a player population, according to NFL data, that is 60 to 70% black, and yet we have no blacks in senior management in the newsroom. We have no black copy editors in the newsroom, and we have no full-time black employees on the news desk. To me, that says that we are not being reflective of the community that we cover. And so I have been bringing that up to the leadership at the network for, again, starting back in 2018 after I joined, and even more vigilantly the last 2 years in particular.
Mm.
And, the sad part is that during my time there, we never made any progress with that, despite consistently bringing it up to the leadership, to Roger Goodell and to those under him. So, in terms of my situation, you know, they told my agent back in November that they didn't see any reason they wouldn't bring me back, that everyone loves me. And so there was no reason to expect that I wouldn't be brought back. They said it might be with a pay trim because they were cutting salaries. And yeah, but there was no reason to anticipate I wouldn't be back. So that's mid-November. We get to January, and I questioned Dacia Smith on a national conference call about Dacia Smith is the chief people officer for the NFL. So in essence, she runs HR for the league office. And I questioned her about the lack of black representation in the newsroom. And she kind of dismissed me a little bit about, yeah, you regularly bring it up, you know, hopefully you won't have to bring it up in another year or whatever it was she said. Um, and then a month later, I brought it up to the commissioner again at the press conference because I had asked him about it a year earlier and nothing had changed. So, I wanted to stay on point. 3 weeks after that, the same person who said, "We see no reason you won't be brought back," all of a sudden brings me in and starts asking me about, am I in alignment with the newsroom? Which I said, no, I can't be. I can't be in alignment with a newsroom that has no black representation at these key positions. And then I was told it's tough to fight corporate headwinds. Sometimes you got to compromise. And I expressed the areas that I felt I had compromised in, but also said I was not going to compromise my integrity. And at that point, I asked specifically, are you now telling me my contract's not being renewed? And I was told, we don't know. It's still being discussed. And 3 weeks later, they informed my agent that it wasn't being renewed. So that's what happened. That's where it is. And we'll see what happens next.
How do you maybe look at maybe the legacy that you've hoped you've left in that position, or how do you hope people will remember your time with them, maybe in time, as we kind of move forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. I honestly don't think a lot about legacy and that sort of thing. I just try and do what's right. Ultimately, what I hope is that change comes to the newsroom, because that's really what this was all about from the very beginning. Is just having different voices in leadership when decisions are being made about how these players are going to be covered. And so people will say to me, and even my immediate supervisor asked one of my colleagues who happens to be black, why does Jim keep focusing on this? We have a diverse newsroom. And the reason I focus on it is because there is no one who shares the same life or cultural experiences as many of these players at the table when decisions are being made about how to cover them. And so people say, well, why is race important in this discussion? And I'll give you two words: Colin Kaepernick. And I'll go back to the story about how his situation was framed initially as we gave the megaphone to all these people who said that he's being disrespectful to the media and to the flag and to law enforcement. Whereas anyone who, I think any black person or many black people would say, wait a minute, either I've experienced what he is talking about, or I know someone who has experienced what he is talking about. So it is not about these things you are talking about in terms of disrespect. It is really about stopping police brutality against people of color, and in particular, black people. So I always say to young people that I talk to that I understand if you get into this business why you want to be on TV or why you want to see your byline in print. I get it, the ego gratification and all of that. I was that once. I had that same thing. But when we start talking about real power in this business, it is the people in those glass offices who have the real power. Why? Because they determine what is going to be covered, who is going to cover it, and how it's going to be covered. So, excuse me. So when I talk to young people, I try and tell them, don't miss out on being an editor. Don't miss out on being a producer, those sorts of things. Because if you really want to make change, that's where that power is. And hopefully, my hope is that we will have more young people who will go down those roads so that they can be at that decision-making table when stories, sensitive stories come up about black people in the NFL or really anywhere in journalism, just so we have representation. That's why I always say representation matters.
And Jim, what did it mean to you? Like, so many people seem to have reached out, like after the news broke, after you tweeted it out. Everyone kind of saying how they respected kind of the way you do your job and supported and or kind of seemed to be encouraging. I guess, what did it mean to you to kind of get that outpouring of support amid kind of, being having to look for a new job, but you leave and you kind of seem to have left an impact on all these people.
Yeah, and I mean, truthfully, it was really humbling. I know, I mean, I knew I had friends who were going to reach out and be supportive and whatnot, but there was support that came from corners I never anticipated, and it was incredibly humbling, and to have a few powerful people who I've never met, didn't know, who have influence in this business, reach out to friends of mine and say, I need to meet him. I need to talk to him. We need to wrap our arms around him. Man, it was humbling. But it was also something that gave me even more purpose
Mm,
to say, you got to keep going, you know,
yeah.
because it can be lonely out there at times when you go down these roads because everybody wants to get along and um, we make a lot of money to cover a game. And so it'd be very easy to just sit back and collect a check and kind of say, hey, we know what this is about, but whatever, whatever. And my point is, man, I'm a lot closer to the finish line than the starting line. And so I hope to leave this game in a little better um, state than I found it as it relates to us. And so, again, I've made it my purpose, whatever time I have left, I'm going to speak on the issues that need to be spoken on. And hopefully, others will benefit from it. So, you know, the, we'll see what happens next. But I don't. People ask me if I regret. No, I have no regrets. I would do everything the
Mm.
same, because I didn't do anything wrong, other than try and correct what was a major problem within the newsroom.
Mm. And off of that, Jim, I guess, and obviously we're recording this in mid-April. By the time this episode comes out, it's going to be May. So I don't know if you will or will not have kind of a new job situation lined up or what have you. But as we talk here, I ask you this: what exactly are you looking for, I guess, in kind of that next opportunity based off of your experience with NFL Media Group, and as you talk about this purpose that you've found since that whole Colin Kaepernick situation 7 years ago to now, and what you've experienced over the last several weeks, what do you feel like you want in kind of the next step?
Um, One, to get my voice back. There were a lot of things within the NFL media group where I could not speak on, and if I did, I couldn't speak on it in the way that I wanted. That's not going to be a problem going forward. I can guarantee you that, because I'm not getting ready to go anywhere where I feel my voice is going to be um, limited, or constrained by someone else's um, opinion on what it should be, or have other factors come into play about who the bosses are and how will they feel if certain things are written. And I'll speak on that a lot more later, but at a later date. But we covered up a lot of things in that media group that shouldn't have been covered up. And was I complicit in it? You could say that. In part because if I were to say something, I would have been in breach of my contract. And I don't have a contract anymore. So those things will be talked on at the right time. Um, but whatever I do next, the key is to have my voice. The key is to have some independence to write on the things that I want to write about. Um, and lastly, I would just say to you to keep doing good journalism, man. That's that's what this is all about, you know. Um, just, can you do good work? Try and do good work. And I always say every story ain't going to be a Pulitzer, But the great thing about this job is you can move on to tomorrow, and tomorrow's another day to write another story. So somewhere along the way, and you know this, you hit a few where it's like, man, okay, I nailed that one. I feel good about that one.
Facts.
And it makes up for the ones where you're like, you wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and say, man, if I had only said it this way, or if I'd only
Uh-huh.
done it this way,
Yeah.
and we all do that. It's both the blessing and the curse of what we do. Um, so, I just want to do good work. I want to be able to tell the stories that I want to tell in the way that I want to tell them. And I think I'll have that opportunity.
And I think that's kind of a good segue into my last question for you, Jim. I guess for those looking to get into the business, aspiring journalists, I guess what advice would you give to them, and knowing kind of the changing media landscape that we live in, I guess what maybe core, um, I don't know, core tenets would you want to impart upon, that high school, college student looking to break in not only into NFL reporting, football, sports, but maybe being a journalist in today's world?
Yeah, I would say to them, number one, you have to have a passion about it. You know, you have to be curious, and in some ways, in many instances, you have to be unafraid. You know, um, I- it, there are foundational elements to do this job that should go without saying. Things like, number one, hard work. If you want to be successful in this profession, you got to work hard. Um, what does that entail? It entails a lot of hours. It entails a lot of preparation. Russell Wilson likes to say the separation's in the preparation. And the same is true of journalism. So, I teach a course at San Diego State, and one of the things I always say to the students is, I am neither trying to dissuade you or to push you into journalism. What I want to do is make sure that your eyes are open to what you are going to face should you go down that road. Number one, it is a very tough business, very competitive. And the way that it is today, if you are afraid of being fired, don't go into the business. That's my recommendation, because there are a lot of extremely talented people who have been fired or who are on the street, not because of the quality of their work, but because a company decides, you know what, our profit margins aren't where we want to be, and therefore we got to make cuts. And that's different from when I first got in the business. When I first got into newspapers, a lot of newspapers were family owned. The ones that I worked at were what, particularly in San Diego when I got there, it was family owned. And that's different from having to answer to shareholders, or venture capitalists who come in and buy media outlets simply to strip them down and sell them for the highest profit margin. So I say to young people, if you are afraid of being fired, don't come into this business, because the likelihood at some point is you will be. Number two, um, always have a plan B. I learned that during my time at Sports Illustrated, where they were taking the magazine public. They were going to have an IPO. And so Sports Illustrated was buying out contracts and it was laying people off. Excuse me. And so in February, I'm in New York for the Super Bowl, and I'm at our offices there, and another email comes out and says there's going to be another round of layoffs and buyouts. Yada. So I reach out to my boss and say, hey, do I need to be concerned here? No, you're okay. This is February. Well, in March, I'm driving to the dentist's office, about to park. I get a phone call, see it's from the boss, and I'm thinking we're going to talk about a story. And it's, hey, bad news, we got to let you go. It's not performance driven. You make too much money, and we can hire two for the price of one. And I was totally unprepared for it. Now, I was fortunate in that I got a job pretty quickly after, but I was unprepared for it, because I had bought into that whole thing. If you do good work and you work hard, you'll always have a job. And that wasn't the case. So these things that I'm saying now are not meant, again, to dissuade young people from coming into the profession. It is more to say, just come in with your eyes open. And if you're okay with that, man, go after it. The other thing I have to try and tell young people too is understand what all is involved with this. Um, because you put in a lot of hours. If you want to be successful and you want to climb the ladder, you put in a lot of hours and there's a lot of unpredictability. You're on the clock 24/7, literally, especially if you're a professional beat writer. And so now you and your girlfriend or your spouse may have dinner plans for celebrating an anniversary. And all of a sudden the story breaks. And you got to say to her, hey, babe, I'm sorry. Got to go to work. Not all spouses are going to be, okay with that. Let me just put it
Yeah.
that way. And so these are things we deal with. And so if you're not comfortable with that, is this the right business for you? Maybe a 9 to 5 is better. So having said all of that, it is still one of the greatest professions and jobs around. And you know this, Ben, we get paid money to cover a kid's game. And when we see the special and unique talents that these athletes have, and to be around it and to be able to write about it, to me, is just a tremendous joy. And one of my things is, like, I really get motivated by trying to find out, when I see greatness, trying to figure out what makes this person great, right? What makes this person tick, male or female, young or older, what makes them tick? And when you're around those individuals, man, it gets me going. I remember I did a piece on Jerry Jones one time. And so, of course, all the haters came out about Jerry and they're just going off and whatnot. And I said, for me, what was so gratifying about the story is, regardless of what you think about Jerry, he is truly one of the great businessmen in this country. I want to know why. I want to know what makes him go,
Hmm.
what motivates him. He's got enough, but it's clearly not enough because he's not willing to settle there. And so I just love being around those individuals to try and figure out, their mindset, how they approach what they do, why they're successful, and maybe why others aren't. So yeah, it's all. I went off on a number of different areas to that question, but no, if you want to get into it, man, there are no secrets. You got to work hard. You got to build relationships. It's a relationship business. At the end of the day, it's a people business. Um, and the thing that I have found or tried to do is treat people with respect. So what do I mean by that? You're going to write negative stories at times. But what I always try and do is, before I write a negative story or something that is negative or critical, is at least go to that individual and say, look, here's what I'm writing, and give them an opportunity to address it. Doesn't mean it's going to change what I write, but at least they've been heard, as opposed to they pick up the paper. I'm sorry, I'm doing my old school thing now, pick up the paper, or they open their phones and all of a sudden there's a story and they're like, well, what the hell? I didn't know he was doing this. And what he said ain't right. He missed this part, the context here. And now you've burned a relationship. And people think the NFL is big. It is not big. It is a very small place where you develop a reputation really quickly. And if your reputation gets out that you're, always looking for the salacious, or you're not going to represent or present the facts as they are, guys can shut you out now real easily. Because why? They have their own platforms now. And in many ways, they don't need us.
Yeah.
Because they can go straight to the fan. Whereas when I started out, they couldn't. So there's a delicate line there and a balance there that to me is kind of fascinating. And fortunately, I won't have to navigate it, too many years longer. I'll leave
Yeah.
that to you
So
young
all my
guys.
generation.
Yeah, and that's real. That's
Yeah,
real.
it
So,
is.
um, but it's a great profession, but it has its difficulties like everything else. But at the end of the day, for me personally, it's just being able to be around people who are the best at what they do in the world, and being able to write about it, being able to discuss it and learn from them. Um, I can't imagine doing anything else.
Awesome. Well, guys, that will do it for this episode of Raw Facts. Be sure to like, share, subscribe. Appreciate you guys for rocking with me, for supporting the show, and a big thank you to Jim Trotter. Someone I have a lot of respect for. One of the guys I look up to in terms of how he does his job. So, Jim, this has been a blessing. Thank you so much for your time.
No, I appreciate you having me, man. It means a lot.
Yes, sir. All right, guys.